Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Diane Simons, and I am the President of WIZO New South Wales. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live, and recognise their continuing connections to land, water, and community. I pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Today is a very special day. I am delighted to welcome Ronit Craypot, President of WIZO Victoria, as my co-host for this event. Ronit and I take great pleasure in welcoming you all. Together, we welcome Federal President Paulette Cherney, OAM, past Federal President Ronnie Bogner, OAM, and Gilla Lieberman, all state presidents, members of WIZO, and friends. Before we start the proceedings today, and of course, a formal welcome to Jason shortly, Ronit and I would like to extend a hearty Mazal Tov wishes to Jason and his family on the engagement of daughter Anna to Eric just 2 days ago in Dubai. Mazel Tov, Jason. How small is our world? I was in shul on Friday night and heard from our cantor Shimon Farkas, who is also on this webinar and who happens to be your cousin, that your daughter got engaged. 6 degrees of separation indeed. Back to WIZO. I am pleased to report that right now in Israel, COVID statistics are easing and life is slowly returning to a new normality. A normality that is masks, sanitizers, and regular health checks. Our WIZO facilities are reopening and the children in our care are once again receiving the first-class care that WIZO is renowned for, as the biggest welfare partner of the Israeli government. However, we realise that there are so many vulnerable families that require our ongoing support and dedication. Our job is continuous, so that no one falls between the cracks. Whatever there is need, whenever anything needs done, we invent ourselves and we are there, no matter what, doing what matters. It is with the community support that we are able to achieve the amazing results which in effect change the lives of 1 in 4 Israelis each and every day, a statistic that we are rightly proud of. We know just how tough this year has been for everyone, but our good fortune is that none of you have forgotten about our Israeli brothers and sisters through WIZO, and we are so grateful. And now onto the program.
This webinar and the guest we have today is an example of the innovative organisation that WIZO is. I am most honoured to be introducing our guest speaker this morning, Mr. Jason Greenblatt. To go through all his accomplishments would take the whole day. Therefore, I will just give you an abridged resume, and I am sure by the end of his presentation, you will have learned the enormous contribution our guest has made to Israel and the Jewish people. Prior to joining the White House, Jason spent 20 years in senior positions at the Trump Organization. Jason remains involved working towards peace and prosperity throughout the Middle East by building economic bridges between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Among his first acts, President Trump appointed his longtime advisor and chief legal officer, Jason Greenblatt, as an assistant to the president and the White House special envoy to the Middle East. In this role, Greenblatt served as one of the chief architects of the Peace to Prosperity plan between Israel and the Palestinians and between Israel and its Arab neighbors. During the nearly 3 years that Jason worked at the White House, he traveled extensively throughout the Middle East, Europe, and elsewhere, meeting with heads of state, foreign ministers, and other political leaders, top business executives, and a large array of other key influencers to re-educate people about the conflict and its complexities, and to begin to build the bridge necessary to achieve peace. Jason has spoken in front of the UN Security Council numerous times about the tremendous bias against Israel at the UN, emphasizing Israel's absolute right to defend itself, condemning Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and criticizing the UN for its failure to issue such condemnations and for not making clear that the path to a comprehensive resolution to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians will only come to pass, if at all, through direct negotiations between the parties. It is clear that there are many topics that we would like to hear about this morning. Please join me in welcoming Jason Greenblatt to WIZO Australia. Over to you, Jason.
Good morning, everybody, from dark and very early Dubai. It's a little after 4 a.m. here in Dubai, and I'm so excited to join you. First of all, thank you so much for the warm welcome and the wishes of Mazel Tov. Truly appreciated. I'm going to tell my daughter Anna and my future son-in-law Eric that you were kind enough to mention them in the talk. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the important work that you do for the support of Israel and the Jewish people. It's truly an honor to be here. What I thought I would do this morning is spend a little bit of time just catching you up a bit on what I did and what I'm seeing right now, and then turn it over to questions to everybody. It's rare that a diplomat actually gets to see the fruits of their labor so quickly and so enormously. So I just happened to be here in Dubai. I've joined another organization for remarks, and I decided to bring two of my kids because after spending 3 years working in the White House, separate from my family, living separate from my family, only seeing my wife and children on Shabbat and Sunday, now that I'm back in the normal world for about a year now, whenever I travel, I try to bring at least one family member with me to make up for lost time. And it turned out that my son-in-law had intentions to propose this week, or my future son-in-law had intentions to propose this week. So we decided to surprise my daughter, and I brought my whole family here, as well as my future son-in-law, of course. And from the moment I came to JFK Airport, I realized there was just a tremendous change in the air. I was waiting in the lounge to board the Emirates air flight that I took, and I had my kippah on. I wear my kippah during personal time. I never wore my kippah at work. This was sort of a mixed trip, and I decided to keep my kippah on. And most of the people that were on the flight who were joining this group for their trip kept their kippah on. As I settled into my seat, there was a group of people who were trying to, I just want to make sure that you guys are hearing me. Are you down or can you hear me? I'm getting some text that it seems you might be down.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So I overheard some of the other passengers speaking with the flight attendant about beginning a minyan, you know, where they could pray, where they could daven with a minyan. And the flight attendant was just enormously respectful and helpful and helped them organize something. When I came here, I experienced something that I didn't experience in 3 years. So usually when I came as a diplomat, and even after when I left the government and I was here in a private capacity, everybody was always respectful. But now the warmth that they feel with respect to Israel and the Jewish people is enormous. You know, walking around the Dubai Mall, seeing plenty of kippot, going to a restaurant with kosher food, joining a program where the lobby and the halls of the Waldorf Astoria and Palm Jumeirah filled with kippot, hearing davening happening in the hotel itself, having Shabbat meal here. It's just such a dramatic change. And I feel like we have entered a new universe. As an example, after Shabbat ended here, I went with my family to a very close personal friend of ours, an Emirati, and I was watching my kids. He has 3 children. I have 6, as you know, and I was watching some of my younger kids playing with his kids on their lawn. They were playing, I think, soccer, and then they went to play video games. The world has changed. The world is a better place for everything that President Trump and His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and Prime Minister Netanyahu did. And I think we're going to continue to see that growth between the United Arab Emirates and Israel keep going. I think that it remains to be seen who ends up occupying the Oval Office in January. You know, as you could tell, I'm sure the world is watching our election results very closely. I think that if President Trump manages to pull off his victory, then I think that we're going to see continued change. If Vice President Biden ends up being the victor, then I think there may be some challenges ahead. And that's a shame. I will say that having spoken to many people this week, mostly Emirati, there is deep concern in the region. When I started my job, people were unsure about President Trump, but most of the region, from the leadership to most of the diplomatic corps, ended up not liking President Obama. And the reason for that is clear. He saddled them with the JCPOA, the Iran deal, and they were all extraordinarily nervous and upset about it. They, as President Trump's administration handled the Iran deal the way they did and many other things, realized how President Trump truly understood the region. And they felt comfortable with President Trump. They felt comfortable that despite the fact that the region remains unstable in certain areas, the biggest threat to the region, Iran, was at least under control in a way that was far superior to the JCPOA. Vice President Biden made no secret that he intended to go back into the JCPOA in some capacity, and the region is back to being nervous. So the next period of time between now and January 20th is a period of uncertainty, but we will all work and hope and pray that things become a bit more stable, and we will hope that we will continue to see the fruits of the labor of President Trump and the administration. So with that, what I'd like to do perhaps is turn it over to questions, because I'd like to answer what you want to hear.
Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us and for that little brief overview. Mazel tov again on the engagement. We first wanted to talk a little bit about, considering you are in Dubai, if you could just give us a little bit more insight into what led up to this historic peace deal between the UAE and also Bahrain, and we see obviously there's going to be something with Sudan. If you could just give us a little bit more insight into how these deals came about, and also there was a bit of a hint that there was at least 5 more Arab states. You know, I'm not expecting you to give us the surprise here, but just let us know if that's the case, if there will be more to come.
Sure. Well, we did something a bit different than prior administrations. When we came in, we studied the conflict deeply. We spoke to all the leadership. We also spoke to the people, and we were trying to understand why there was a peace agreement between Jordan and Israel and a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, and yet there was no peace agreement with any other nation, some of whom, like the United Arab Emirates, were never at war with Israel. And every time we had these discussions, we were always told the traditional talking points. By the way, we were told this by our own government, by the career folks. We were certainly told this by the Europeans. We were told this by the diplomatic corps throughout the region. I think Australia might have not given us this bad advice, so kudos to Australia. But the general consensus was that the Israel-Palestinian conflict was the core conflict of the region. I would tell you right now that it's just not true. It might have been true decades ago. It simply wasn't true when we entered office, and probably for a considerable amount of time before then. You know, if you were lucky enough to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, unfortunately, you're not going to solve the tragedy in Syria and Yemen and so many other problems that remain in the Middle East. And, you know, the Middle East is a volatile place. At the same time, we were also told that there would never be peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors without fixing or solving the Palestinian problem. And they would always go back to what is called the Arab Peace Initiative. The Arab Peace Initiative was something that was proposed by Saudi Arabia many years ago. And truth be told, when I read it many years ago, it took my breath away. It was just an amazing thing to think that the Arab countries would actually normalize with Israel. But when you really read it, and certainly we had to really read it in the positions that we were in, we also realized that it was very aspirational and said nothing other than, if Israel gives up everything, meaning if Israel gives in to all of the Palestinian demands, then maybe the Arab countries, some of them, all of them, maybe they'll make peace a little bit later. So we wanted to take that hopeful and aspirational paradigm, but make it a bit more realistic. Never abandoning the approach of trying to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians, because that is something that everybody hopes can happen, if it's at all realistic. We also wanted to prove that while the two conflicts, the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, were intricately intertwined, they could also be broken apart and solved separately. So our approach was simply to try to get the entire thing done. But if we couldn't get the entire thing done, then we would try to get pieces of it done. And although I like to joke that I helped build the stadium and grow the grass and even kick the ball way down the field, I did not get to score the goal, but I give President Trump and Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and David Friedman, all my friends and colleagues, just tremendous credit for getting this done. So I think the difference is simply that we recognize that whatever the rules of the game that people were playing by were perhaps right a long time ago, but they needed to be looked at with a fresh set of eyes. And maybe one of the things that convinced us of this was President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So for those of you who don't know, that has been a law on the United States books for many, many years. But presidential candidates have always promised to do that and to move the US Embassy to Jerusalem. Every president, once they came in, reneged on that promise. The reason they were able to do it is there was a national security waiver that allowed the president to determine if there was to be a national security risk, they did not have to follow US law on that point. Having gone through the extensive process that every administration must have done, but certainly President Trump did, and having been warned about how blood would fill the streets if President Trump followed US law, listening to the phone calls and the pressure that President Trump got from world leaders about doing it and how he can't do it and why he can't do it, I'll tell you, I'm just amazed that he followed through on his promise. He knew that it was the right thing to do. He knew that historically Jerusalem was and always will be the capital of Israel. He did it, and guess what? Nothing happened. And step by step, we started to bust the myths of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the Arab-Israeli conflict. And the Abraham Accords is just another step in that direction. As to your question of what happens in the future, how many countries and all that, it's difficult to say because of the strange period that we're in the United States of America. I think that if President Trump remains in office, and personally I'm a Trump supporter, so I certainly hope he will, I think we will see more progress. I think that the region is ready. The region is sick and tired of the conflict. That doesn't mean they don't want to help Palestinians. It doesn't mean they don't want to help the Palestinians have better lives and actually achieve peace. But they've come to the realization that their own national security issues, their own economic issues, all the other things that a country looks at when making decisions for their own country are more important. They want to move forward. If President Trump does not remain in office, I don't know where we will go. Part of it will depend on what Joe Biden does with respect to the Iran deal. Part of it will be how do they trust Joe Biden? Are they willing to take the risks? And we shouldn't underestimate, and I said this a little bit earlier, we shouldn't underestimate just how courageous and bold it was for His Royal Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed to do what he did. Other leaders, I hope, will have the same courage. I should recognize, of course, the King of Bahrain did the same. And we shouldn't overlook the fact that Saudi Arabia is now allowing Israel flights over the land of Saudi Arabia, over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I will tell you that when I left now I guess we're going on quite some time, that would have been a win in and of itself, meaning we had asked for overflight rights and we were wondering if we would even get overflight rights from any of these countries. And now look where we are, kosher in Dubai, right? Yeah. Engagements in Dubai.
That's pretty remarkable. Like, I think just as Australians, firstly, our flight time to Israel is really long based on the fact that we fly from Asia, and if you go on a El Al flight, you haven't been able to fly in certain airspace. So, we're looking at this keenly to see if it makes our time easier. And I think also just the opportunity to, once our skies open and we can travel, to actually go somewhere like Dubai, and for you to say that there's kosher food and the relations are really warm, which I don't think we've seen as much. I still wouldn't feel comfortable going to Jordan, and I certainly wouldn't go to Egypt. So I feel like there's a sort of a real different feeling in this piece with the UAE. And I'm sure that you would obviously feel the same too, having been there and now I'm sure you've been there over many years, but experiencing it properly now with the kosher food and all of that. I just wanted to pivot back a little bit for a second, because you did mention the Israelis and the Palestinians, and obviously we can't ignore that with the normalization of relations with the Arab states, what does this actually mean? At some point, are the Palestinians and Israelis going to sit back at the table? And what do you think that it will take to get the Palestinians back to the negotiating table? And just if I could just add one more thing to that, if during your time and your tenure, did you feel that there was a genuine willingness on the part of the Palestinians to find a lasting peace with Israelis?
So let's take Palestinians and divide them into what I would say 3 groups. There are the Palestinian people, and then there are 2 leaderships. There's the leadership in Ramallah and the leadership in Gaza. Yeah. And let's start with the leadership in Gaza, because very few people talk about it. The occasional time you have a conversation, people speak about Hamas. But what I think people don't realize is that the rift within the Palestinian leadership, between the leadership in Ramallah, the PA, and the leadership in Gaza, that rift is so bad that before one can even discuss peace between Israel and the Palestinians, one has to understand, can the Palestinians even pull it off, right? When I started in government, and after several weeks or months of study, and I asked that question of my talented State Department and National Security Council team, because I don't want to put them down. They're amazing people, dedicated diplomats, and without them, I couldn't have done my job, and none of these, none of the fruits that we're seeing now can have been achieved. But they looked at things differently, and one of them said to me, let's not point out that Hamas could actually wreck any form of peace deal. It's just very bad to give them that power. So being new to government, I thought, okay, okay. And, we ended the meeting, and then I spent another couple of days thinking about it. And I said, but guys, what are we doing? We're just pushing paper around. We're going to release something and then find out that President Abbas will say X, and then Hamas is going to say Y, and what's going to happen? So we changed tactic there too. And we wanted to point out to the world what the truth is. And the truth is that there are 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza who are subjugated by Hamas, terrorist thugs who are funded by Iran. And they are indeed a roadblock to peace. So to answer your question about whether the Palestinians are ready, Hamas is definitely not ready. Obviously, some Palestinians in Gaza belong to Hamas, a substantial number. Some argue it's 20,000, many argue it's much more. That group of people, unless and until they change their ways, will block peace and will fight peace and still threaten to destroy Israel. And of course, it's no secret that Hamas causes tremendous harm to Israel. Terror tunnel attacks, burning fields, so many different things. Let's move on to the leadership in Ramallah, the PA. I would say that there are those in the PA who are ready to make a realistic peace with Israel. And then there are those in the PA who are absolutely not ready and will continue to hold on to their demands forever and ever. And when I say demands, that's also a very important word. One of the things that when I did speak at the UN Security Council is, I wanted to point out that just because the Palestinians demand something, just because they want something, just because they claim it is their right, and just because the Europeans agree with that and much of the United Nations, that doesn't mean it is their right. It is a claim. So this notion that East Jerusalem, including the holiest place to the Jewish people, the notion that that belongs to the Palestinian people because somebody said that is preposterous. The parties have to get together and negotiate. Will they be able to negotiate something? It remains to be seen. I think it's incumbent upon all supporters of Israel, of course, to support peace and of course to recognize that the Palestinian people do suffer. But what they have to recognize is, where does the suffering come from? And the suffering does not come from Israel as the so-called occupier. That's false. It does not come from Israel occupying Palestinian land. It is not Palestinian land. It is disputed land. All of these myths need to be corrected in order for there to be progress. So we got criticized for the plan that we put forth, but the plan that we put forth was different in many respects. First of all, it wasn't just a bullet point of a couple of things that were vague and uncertain and sounded great, but nobody quite understood what they were. You know, to say that Israel has to withdraw to the 67 borders, the question is why? Who said that Israel has to withdraw to the 67 borders? We recognize that the Palestinians want a state. Okay. So we're going to give them a state that makes sense, a state that will keep Israel safe and secure, a state that will not require uprooting any Jew or Arab from their home, a state that Israel could defend itself if things go in the wrong direction, a state that the Palestinians can create something incredible and beautiful and successful, just as Israel did. The difference is that Israel had to do it under dire circumstances from the moment of its formation. It was attacked again and again and again, and then it was attacked with terrorism. The Palestinian state, if one were to come to pass in the form that we put forth in the plan, has a tremendous chance of success from the moment that it's born, because the entire world will rejoice and funnel all sorts of money there and create something that they can just be thrilled with, as long as they root out corruption, as long as they stop paying terrorists to harm and murder Israelis. And that's the other problem with the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah. The Palestinian Authority continues to pay Palestinians to harm and murder Israelis. The United States has a law in its books called the Taylor Force Law, which cuts off money to the Palestinians if they do that. Other countries have started to look into this. With that mentality, it's very, very hard to build peace. And the last group of people are the Palestinian people themselves. I've become close to countless Palestinians. You know, you can't make peace if you really don't talk to the people, don't understand the people, don't listen to the people. Many of those Palestinians are ready for peace. I'm not telling you that they all looked at the plan and then called me up and said, "Oh, Jason, thank you. What a great plan," right? They were disappointed, to be honest, many of them, but they recognized the tremendous effort that went into it. They also recognized that what they've been promised isn't realistic. And they are ready, many of them are ready for a realistic plan. So, you know, when you're a diplomat, you have to be an optimist and a realist and a pessimist all at the same time. I still remain hopeful. I still remain very active in the space from a private capacity, trying to do what I can. And, you know, one could only pray that that problem will be resolved as well. But if it can't be resolved, I hope that there's more progress on the rest of the Israel-Arab front.
Thank you, Jason, and a personal mazel tov from myself. It's quite amazing. A year ago this week, I was in Dubai myself in a circuitous route on the way to Israel via Switzerland, and how different things look now a year later. It's really quite amazing. Given that President Trump and yourself and the team have sort of accepted that Netanyahu's theory of undoing the Gordian knot, of jumping over the Palestinians to do peace treaties with Arab countries, has proven to be extremely successful. How is it, or is it in fact the case, that let's say the Europeans and other such countries, allies of the United States, haven't come on board?
I just want to correct one thing. I would not say, maybe Netanyahu uses that, and I'm a supporter of Bibi Netanyahu too. Maybe he does say jumping over the Palestinians. That's probably a fair characterization. We really tried hard not to jump over them, but to include them. And we tried every which way to include them. I think back to the conference that Jared Kushner organized in Bahrain, you know, in June, I think of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And it was remarkable. It was a conference that many countries around the world came to understand a huge economic plan that was put together for the United States government to help the Palestinians. We also were different in that we tried to break apart the political issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the economic issues. We wanted to explain that even once you solve the political issues, you also have to be able to build something that works, right? The Palestinians not only refused to attend that conference, but actually boycotted it and tried to get other countries to boycott it. So the challenge that we faced with the Palestinians was not so much that we had intended to brush them aside or jump over them, but they were simply unwilling to negotiate, participate, or help unless we were willing to say the things that they wanted us to say, which is, you know, variations of East Jerusalem will be the capital, not a capital in East Jerusalem. Refugees, they were a bit more vague on, but 67 borders plus or minus a couple of percentage points, meaning they stick to their talking points, they will do it, and they will only do it their way. So those were the challenges, but we tried not to exclude them, but to include them every step of the way. They chose to exclude themselves. As to your question about the Europeans and others, there is just a dramatic difference in opinion. And I view, having now spent 3 years plus on this file, it's an old way of thinking, a tired way of thinking, sort of, if you say it enough times, maybe it'll happen way of thinking. Most of the Europeans, not all, were simply against President Trump from the outset. They were against our out-of-the-box worldview of how to deal with it. They felt that there was no way there would be peace with the Arabs, who obviously proved them wrong, without the Palestinians being involved. And it's not just, by the way, the Europeans. If you look at remarks by former Secretary John Kerry, it's a very interesting video that was sent around at the time that President Trump announced the Abraham Accords, where John Kerry, some number of years ago, I think before our administration entered office, said there is no way, no possible way, that any Arab nation will make a peace agreement with Israel without solving the Palestinian problem. And that is the conventional thinking. Of course, after the Abraham Accords were announced and the agreements were ratified, he's now saying that President Trump wasn't really successful, in other than he built on the successes of all the work that they laid before us, which is, of course, very silly, right? I will tell you that when I left the administration, I did not imagine that they would be so successful in actually closing the deal with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and then, of course, Sudan. So any notion that anybody tries to take credit for what President Trump and the other leaders accomplished is unfair. But as to the Europeans, and I will add to that the United Nations, there's either a deep distrust or even animosity toward Israel. And it is a fight that we have to fight day in and day out. And I'd encourage all of you who are listening to recognize this deep animosity that Israel faces at the United Nations and elsewhere, and work hard to try to change the conversation. Don't let that old way of thinking sway your thoughts. Learn about the conflict, and by no means, put Palestinian people down. You shouldn't. We should work toward peace, absolutely. They deserve great lives, but understand the root of the problem and realistic possible solutions, and not make demands like the Europeans and others do of Israel that are either unfair, impossible, or wrong.
I guess we're saying it in different ways, but the point was that with Palestinian intransigence, there was a roadblock to anything future, whereas one could jump over that issue if they weren't willing to come to the party to make other deals. But I guess that leads us to the future. And I'd like a two-part question to that one. Should the administration change on the 20th of January, what do you envisage that the future could be in terms of, is there anything that can be undone, or do you see it as a potential for further positive moves, or do you see it just as status quo continuing? And the second part of that question is, President Trump, whether he remains or does not, still has 2 months. Do you see anything that could happen in the next 2 months that could also change the situation?
So I definitely am worried if there's a change in administration in a couple of respects. I don't think Joe Biden will undo the recognition of Jerusalem, and I don't think he'll move the U.S. Embassy back to Tel Aviv. I think that would be politically costly to him, but the cover that he has for not doing it is because it was U.S. law. So I think that is probably fairly safe. I will say that he doesn't understand that particular U.S. law, because during the campaign, his remarks were along the lines of he wouldn't change it, but he wouldn't have done it. He didn't use these words, but something like exacted a penalty out of Israel in order to do it. And that shows how he didn't understand US law, because US law doesn't say recognize Jerusalem and move the embassy if Israel gives up X or Y. US law says do it unless there's a national security reason not to do it. So President Trump determined there wasn't a national security reason, did it, and it would be hard for Joe Biden to undo it. I would worry a bit about the Golan Heights recognition. That was an executive order. I think it was the right decision. And I think that people will agitate for him to undo that historic recognition. And that would be a shame. I think that he may open up a PLO office back in Washington, D.C. We closed the PLO office because under US law, if President Abbas threatened Israel, President Abbas made a speech at the United Nations General Assembly threatening to bring Israel to the International Criminal Court. That triggered a US law which required us to close the PLO office. There's been a lot of talk of reopening that PLO office by a Biden administration, and I think that they're going to have some legal challenges, but that remains a possibility. To me, if the Palestinian leadership recognizes that they have to work towards a realistic, good faith peace with Israel, it wouldn't bother me if they open up the PLO office again. However, if they simply open it up because they think the Trump administration was wrong for closing it, or they open it up because that is a demand of the Palestinian leadership just to come back to the table, if you will, I think that would be a major mistake. Other decisions, funding for UNRWA. The UNRWA is a terrible organization. It keeps Palestinians in a state of perpetual victimhood. It does not allow them to have a future. It is mismanaged. In some cases, it is corrupt. And what needs to happen is somebody needs to figure out if there indeed is no peace for some period of time, whether it's a year or decades more, these Palestinians who live in these wretched refugee camps deserve a future. Let's remember, they're not really refugees. Some are, there's a few from that generation, but most of them are the children or grandchildren or beyond of the original refugees. Under what rational, why would we ever want to leave these people in these refugee camps? So the UNRWA mockery is nothing more than just taking money and running a UN organization with no hope of fixing problems. And I do think that a Joe Biden administration likely will continue to fund back into UNRWA, and that would be a shame. That's a shame for the US taxpayer, a shame for the Australian taxpayer too, by the way, but mostly a shame for those Palestinians who suffer there. So I do think that there will be decisions that can be undone. I don't know that Joe Biden will be focused on this at the beginning. He would come into trying to figure out how to fix COVID. I think he thinks he knows how to fix COVID. I think, most places don't yet know how to fix COVID without a vaccine. I will say I give Dubai a tremendous amount of credit. I had to be tested in order to come here. There are lots of restrictions. Everyone is wearing a mask. There are very clear signs on all the stores or wherever it is you want to go about occupancy rules and things like that. We're very COVID safe in my family. My 91-year-old dad lives with us, so we're perhaps more careful than most. I haven't traveled much during the last 7 months, which for me was great because thank God we're healthy, so I got to make up lost time with my family. This is the first trip we've taken as a family, and I feel generally comfortable here. So yes, there are certain things that one could do to keep citizens safe, but at the same time, COVID is a problem and he's going to have to deal with that. And I think he'll be preoccupied with that and the US economy at the beginning. But I think that there will be many people who will come in and try to undo our way of thinking and go back to sort of, as you said earlier, the European style of thinking, which is not going to be helpful. It's not helpful to Israel. It's not helpful to the Palestinians. It's not helpful to the peace effort. And it's not helpful to the region at all.
Yeah, the second part of the question was the remaining 2 months of President Trump's term, at least of this term. Are we likely to see anything in terms of QME, extension of sovereignty, Pollard, or any of those sorts of things, or something else?
Yeah, sorry, I probably neglected or evaded the question. It's hard to say. I mean, they're trying to win the Oval Office. So I think, the vast majority of focus is going to be on running the United States, fixing its problems, COVID, Operation Warp Speed, vaccine, and getting back into the Oval Office. It would be hard to imagine that there would be priorities. I mean, Jonathan Pollard would not be a time issue. My hope is that they do something with him. I don't have any inside baseball there, so please don't quote me. It's just a personal hope. I don't know what's going to happen. Will some country magically sign up another part of the Abraham Accords? It's possible. I think most countries at this point will want to wait to see who the next occupant is of the Oval Office. As far as extension of sovereignty over what I call Judea and Samaria, what some call the West Bank, but what should never be called occupied Palestinian territory. I think the answer is no. I'd be surprised if anything like that would happen. I do want to stress again, language is important for those of you, who are not familiar with it. Judea Samaria is the historical name for the region. I would encourage you to use it. I'd encourage you not to use the word settlements, because what they are really are cities and towns. Use of the word settlements makes it harder to achieve peace, because it has a very negative ideology, and it makes it seem like they're all illegal. And at least under US view, certainly under the Trump administration, that's not necessarily true. And then you asked one more tough one in there. I'm trying to remember that.
QME.
Oh, yes, thank you. Look, QME is US law. The United States is not, whatever the administration
Sorry,
is.
Jason, we're being asked what QME is. Qualitative military edge, the sale of the F-35s to the UAE, or more advanced weaponry to Israel.
Yeah, under US law, we have to maintain the QME. Thank God that is US law, so it doesn't become a political hot potato in our country. So even if they sell advanced weaponry to the UAE or elsewhere, they have to do it in consultation with Israel and to maintain that QME, and Israel is very involved in those discussions, and as I understand it, has approved certain sales. So I'm not concerned about that at all, and I think the region is stronger, and Israel is safer in cooperation with the United Arab Emirates than they are without it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to hand back to Emily now, who's going to deal with some of the questions that are coming on the chat.
Sure.
Yes, we have a question from Linda, which is, do you believe with more Arab countries seeking peace with Israel, that this will put pressure on the Palestinians as they realize they are losing support amongst the Arab nations?
So a couple of years ago, I would have said no, but I do think the Palestinians recognize that they have lost their veto card. They still take the position or use language that this was a stab in their back by the United Arab Emirates. They quieted down quickly because the United Arab Emirates undoubtedly sent a signal that that was not the way they should be behaving. So at the beginning, there was quick, strong criticism. They're a little bit quiet on that, but no matter how they see the support eroding for them in the region, they still can't come to terms with the fact that unless and until they sit down with it, first of all, they have to fix their own house, as I mentioned earlier in the call, which they just can't seem to do. And then unless and until they're willing to sit down directly with Israel and not try to make political gains at the United Nations or in international conferences, which end up doing nothing for them, they're not going to have better lives. They will continue to play that game. They will work on the ICC, the International Criminal Court. They will continue to try to gain wins at the UN Security Council, which under a Biden administration will be easier. As you know, President Obama's administration left Israel with that terrible UN Resolution 2334. That is something that I do worry about under a Biden administration, furthering things like that. So I think their hope is to try to exact pressure on Israel. And even though they realize their support is eroding, I don't think that that's going to get them back to the table. If Saudi Arabia or a bunch of other countries end up jumping into the Abraham Accords, maybe that will make them realize that their game is over and they have to be serious about making peace.
Yeah. And another question that we have here is from Anthony, and he asks, is education for the younger generation of Palestinians being taught so that they can root out bad culture, which will no doubt help the process so peace and the elimination of hate towards Israel and its people? Any roadmap must have direction, and direction must have education and understanding to achieve the goal. So I suppose it sort of speaks to, I don't know whether the United States has any role in that, but just in terms of, educating the next generation to not hate and to know that peace is possible.
I would say, unfortunately, it is not changing. To go back to the rule that they encourage Palestinians to harm and murder Israelis and pay them, I would say that culture of hate still exists. Now, having said that, there are many Palestinians who don't believe that. They're smarter than that. I think social media is, while it's harmful in some respects, is actually very helpful there. They realize that Israel and the Israelis are not the enemy. I can tell you a quick story. In January of 2018, I was in Jerusalem with Vice President Pence. My family was there on vacation. I had a meeting with a bunch of young Palestinians, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and we had such a great meeting. I decided to invite them for a Shabbat meal. So I called my wife. It was maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the winter, and my wife is just an angel and always is willing to help in my crazy ideas. But she pointed out that she had already bought all the food for Shabbat at the shuk. The shuk is closed. Everything is closed. We didn't have enough food. Was this really such a good idea? I said, come on, we have to do it. So they show up at our door. And my kids were a bit nervous, to be honest. This was probably the first extended interaction they had with Palestinians, but we had a beautiful meal together. More of that needs to be done. Unfortunately, it's not going to be done through the Palestinian Authority, and certainly not through Hamas. It has to be done with ordinary people. One of the biggest problems in the conflict is there's such a division between the two societies that until we break down those divisions, it's going to be harder to get at that education and teaching respect for everybody.
Thank you for that. Here's a final question for you. Maybe you won't want to deal with it, but the Australian Jewish community is an extremely Zionist community. And what happens in Israel concerns us deeply. And it does definitely play a role in our relationship with all sides of the government. I'm not suggesting that for American Jewry, Israel has to always be the first priority, but it seems to us it's a very different situation in the United States. It's a little hard for us to understand from here just how it's such a clear voting pattern of the Jewish community in the United States. Do you care to comment on that?
I think we need some Australians to come to America and do a little teaching. If you want to talk about education.
Very different.
It reminds me a bit of your European question. I think there's a misguided notion because our media is so anti-Israel and there's just so much propaganda out there. And there are well-meaning Jews who in their heart probably do support Israel, but have a complete misunderstanding of not only what Israel stands for, but what Israel is up against. They think that Israel is, the occupying power. They don't think that because they're bad people. They think that because this is what they're taught. So perhaps we don't do as good a job in educating our children as you guys do in Australia, and maybe we have to learn from you. It is a very, very big problem. It's not a problem generally in the communities that my kids frequent, because I think we try to do a good job. But the vast majority of Americans, Jewish Americans, wonder if Israel is doing something wrong, and that should never be. And I hope and pray that we can fix that problem. But kudos to you guys there for doing what you do, because you've obviously done a great job and instill in your children and future generations the reality of Israel, and that's so important. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I think our challenge is to have people see the true picture of Israel, which is why we believe that sending as many people to Israel as possible and experiencing it is just the best form of education. On that note, we're going to throw back to Ronit to do the thanks and the wind up. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the questions.
Jason, first of all, thank you. And I'm wishing you and your family, Mazal Tov of the engagement of your daughter. I'm sure that all of you will agree that it's been the most insightful and educational hour with our special guest, Jason Greenblatt. As an Israeli, it is incredible to see such a passionate love towards Israel from Jews in the diaspora, and today, witnessing your ability to inspire that love in others leave us all in awe, and it's sincerely unique. Thank you. Thank you, Lona, for organizing today's special webinar. It could not have been as successful without your determination and hard work. And it has been a great collaboration between the state, and we cannot wait to many more in the future. Emily, my sister-in-law, by the way, and Ron, we simply could not have done this without you both. Two incredible community leaders with extensive knowledge of Israel and the Middle East. We are grateful that you both joined us this morning. By the way, great questions. Jason, thank you for taking this time, particularly in these times, to share with us your experience, your important work, and tireless dedication to the people of Israel. I know that we feel proud that one of our tribe has achieved such as and done so much good to the greatest world. Kol hakavod. On behalf of all of us, wishing you many more successful years ahead. And when you eventually make Aliyah, we would like to take you and your wife to one of our incredible WIZO initiatives, such as a school or daycare centers, so you can see firsthand the essential work that we do each and every day. In a WIZO tradition, we are delighted to present you over the Zoom with a certificate which read, with sincere thanks and appreciation for sharing your expertise, knowledge, and worldwide experience with all your friends in WIZO Australia. Toda rabba. And to you all, thank you for attending this morning and wishing you all a safe and a healthy holiday and enjoy the beautiful day. Toda rabba, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really so great to be here. Thank you for all the important questions. Thank you for caring. Thank you for listening. And shalom from Dubai.